I want to start today by picking a fight with a word.
Oh boy.
A word that is basically the golden calf of the 21st century. You see it on corporate mission statements, you see it on, the covers of self-help books, motivational posters.
It's everywhere. It's probably on a coffee mug in your kitchen.
It is. It's on my coffee mug right now, I'm pretty sure.
I think I know exactly where you're going with this.
Empowerment.
Ah, yes. The Holy Grail.
It is the Holy Grail. And look, I'm a fan of it generally. We're told constantly that the goal of life, of work, of therapy is to be empowered, to take control.
To own your destiny.
Right. And we all just nod along because, well, who wants to be disempowered?
That sounds awful. It implies weakness, that you're a victim.
Exactly. So when I first picked up the source material for today, I was, I have to admit, ready to be annoyed. We are doing a deep dive into an excerpt from a work called The Architecture of Accuracy, Proportion over Empowerment. And specifically, we're zooming in on a section titled, Why Holistic Spirituality Rejects Empowerment.
It just sounds like a hot take, doesn't it? Like
Yeah.
they're just trying to be contrarian.
That's what I thought. I thought, great, another edgelord philosopher telling me that having agency is actually bad. But
Yeah.
I was wrong. This text takes a sledgehammer to the concept, but not in the way you'd expect.
No, it's much more precise. It's suggesting that our obsession with empowerment might actually be a symptom of a deeper problem.
So the mission for this deep dive isn't to say that you should be a doormat. We are not saying personal agency is bad.
Not at all.
But we are going to explore this text's argument that holistic spirituality, that's the term it uses, rejects our modern definition of empowerment because we've confused power with accuracy.
And that confusion is, well, it's causing us a lot of misery.
So let's map this out. First, we're going to unpack the diagnosis, why the text calls empowerment egoic compensation.
Which is a heavy phrase.
It is. I fought with it for a while.
Oh.
Then we'll look at the alternative the source proposes, which is this idea of proportion.
And we'll break down the difference between, say, command and participation, which is a really key mental shift.
And finally, we'll talk about why this whole approach looks like passivity to the modern eye. I mean, to my eye, honestly, but is actually something the text calls alignment. So buckle up. This one might mess with your worldview a little bit.
In the best possible way, I hope.
Okay, let's dive straight into the diagnosis. The source material opens with just a punch in the face. It says, empowerment is egoic compensation.
It's a striking opening.
Okay, hold on. Egoic compensation. That sounds like a polite therapist way of saying, you're delusional. But let's ground this. Because when I tell my team they're empowered, I'm not trying to inflate their egos.
Of course not.
I'm trying to get them to take initiative. Is the text saying that's wrong?
Not exactly. It's distinguishing between giving someone authority and this kind of psychological inflation.
Okay.
The text argues that we usually reach for the word empowerment, specifically when we feel the least control. Think about it. When everything is running smoothly, boundaries are clear, you don't need a pep talk about your power.
That's true. I don't need to be empowered to make coffee in the morning. I just do it.
Exactly. You only need the idea of empowerment when you are facing a structural limit, a budget cut, a difficult boss, a health crisis, and you feel small. The text says that in that moment of anxiety, we use empowerment as a drug. It's a narrative drug.
A narrative drug.
Yes. We tell ourselves, I can conquer this, not because we actually have the tools to conquer it, but because the alternative, admitting we're at the mercy of the situation, is just too terrifying.
So it's a defense mechanism. We inflate the self to avoid feeling the crush of reality.
Precisely. The text says empowerment shows up where proportion has already been lost. When a person feels small, powerless, confused, that's the moment they reach for the story of regained control.
So if I'm terrified of a storm, empowerment is me standing on the roof shouting that I can control the wind.
That's a perfect analogy. The text says it promises agency where agency was never structurally possible.
Structurally possible.
That's the key phrase. The source isn't saying you have zero power. It's saying that the empowerment narrative tries to override our natural limitations rather than understand them.
That's a hard pill to swallow, though. Because we love that story. We love the movie moment where the hero just wills their way to victory.
We do.
Yeah.
But the text calls that an illusion. It says exaggerating your agency actually distorts perception.
How so?
Well, if you are convinced you can control the wind, you aren't going to check the weather forecast. You're not going to board up your windows.
You're going to get wet.
You're going to get very wet. By trying to be bigger than the situation, you actually make yourself blind to the reality of it.
Man, that hits home. Because how many times have I stressed myself out trying to fix something that, looking back, was never mine to fix?
Right, and this is where the source says the danger is. When you're inflated, you lose your ability to judge distance. You stop seeing the wall you're about to run into.
Because you're too busy looking at your own reflection as a superhero.
Exactly. The source argues that power shouldn't be claimed or seized. It says power is something to be accurately located.
Accurately located. That feels so different. It moves us away from the ego's need to feel important and toward a realistic assessment of what's happening.
Which connects directly to these two fundamental questions the text contrasts. It says there is a modern question and an ancient question.
Oh, I love this part. It felt like a personality test.
Which one did you fall into?
Oh, definitely the modern one. The modern question, the one the empowered mind asks is, what can I make happen?
Which is the default setting for most of us, right?
Yeah.
We walk into a room, a meeting, a relationship, and we ask, how do I influence this? How do I mold this?
It's output-oriented, active. It feels productive, but the source says the ancient traditions. They didn't ask that.
No.
They asked, what is happening and where do I actually stand within it?
Just hear the difference in that. What is happening and where do I stand within it?
It's a completely different vibe. It forces you to just pause.
It shifts the focus from making to seeing. The text says the core function of holistic spirituality is restoring proportion. It's not about giving you superpowers. It's about giving you a map.
And on that map, there are some really specific boundaries. The source lists these binaries, these pairs of concepts we always confuse. Let's slow down here because this list is really the toolkit for this whole idea.
Okay.
The first one is the distinction between influence and control.
This is the one that trips up high performers the most.
Right, because in a modern workplace, leadership is often defined as controlling outcomes. But the text says that's a category error.
Yeah, it helps to think of it like this. Control is a closed loop. I pull a lever, a machine moves. It's mechanical.
Okay.
Influence is an open system. It's like pouring water into a river. I add to the flow. I might change the temperature slightly, but I do not become the river.
And the empowered mind tries to treat the river like a machine.
And that leads directly to burnout. If you try to control something that only allows for influence like, say, your teenager's choices or the stock market,
Oh, yeah.
you are structurally misaligned. You are pushing on a door that says pull.
And then we get angry when the door doesn't open, or we blame ourselves. We think, I just didn't push hard enough.
Or I just wasn't empowered enough. But the text says, no, you just weren't accurate. You were trying to use a hammer on a cloud.
That brings us to the second pair, which I think is even harder for people like me, participation versus command.
Right. This goes back to that ancient question. If you ask, what can I make happen? You are trying to command. You're trying to drive the bus. But if you ask, what is happening? You are entering a mode of participation. You're part of a process, but you're not the sole author.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here.
Please.
Because when I hear participation, not command, my alarm bells go off. It sounds incredibly weak. It sounds like an excuse to be passive. If I'm a CEO or a parent, I can't just participate. That sounds like negligence.
And the author actually anticipates that exact reaction. They call it the optical illusion of holiness.
Okay, but is it an illusion, or is it actual passivity wrapped in fancy spiritual language?
It's an illusion because our definition of action has been corrupted. We think the only valid form of action is dominance.
Right. If I'm not forcing my will on the situation, I'm not doing anything.
Can I give you an example of action that isn't dominance?
Yeah, please.
Surfing.
Surfing.
Think about it. A surfer is incredibly active. They're balancing, adjusting, reading the water, shifting their weight. It requires immense strength and focus. But do they command the wave?
No. If they try to tell the wave what to do, they drown.
Exactly. They are in a state of hyperactive participation. They are aligned with the energy of the ocean.
And the empowered mind wants to build a dam to stop the wave.
While the accurate mind rides it.
Okay, that clicks. So proportion isn't about sitting on the beach. It's about knowing you aren't the ocean.
Right. And the third binary reinforces this. Responsibility versus dominance.
This is crucial because people hear, don't be empowered, and they think, oh, so I'm not responsible for anything.
No. The source says you absolutely have responsibility. You own your part. You own your balance on the surfboard.
But you don't have dominance.
You don't own the ocean.
It all comes down to boundaries. The text has this beautiful line about discernment. It says, we need to know what belongs to you, what does not, and what must be received rather than seized.
Received rather than seized.
Yeah.
That cuts against the grain of almost every business book written in the last 30 years.
Seize opportunities, seize the day.
Seize the market share, crush the competition.
Right. But the text argues that the most important things, they can't be seized. They have to be received. And you can only receive them if you aren't busy trying to grab them.
But again, this brings us back to that optical illusion. To an empowered mind, this just looks like doing nothing. The text even says, this is why holiness looks passive to empowered minds.
It's because we are addicted to the fantasy of mastery. The text says holistic spirituality refuses the fantasy of mastery. So it doesn't promise control over outcomes, emotions, people, or fate.
Right. And look at that list. Outcomes, emotions, people, and fate.
That's basically everything I try to control on a daily basis.
You and everyone else.
Okay.
But do you actually control your emotions? Or do you experience them? Do you control other people? Do you control fate?
Theoretically, no, but I spend a lot of energy pretending I do.
And that is the fantasy the text talks about. The alternative it offers is fidelity to reality.
Fidelity to reality. That sounds so much more grounded than manifesting your destiny.
And it leads to a structural shift. The source says, empowerment centers the self. Holistic spirituality decentralizes it.
This is the ego blow, right? Empowerment puts me in the middle. I am the protagonist.
And everything else is just the setting for your hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
But when you decentralize the self, you realize you aren't the sun, the planet's orbit. You're just one of the planets.
So does that mean we don't do anything? If I'm just a planet floating around, am I just drifting?
No, and the text is very specific about this. It clarifies that action still occurs. This isn't about sitting on the couch,
Well,
but the nature of the action changes.
how so?
The source describes the action as constrained, contextual, and accountable to forces larger than the individual will.
Constrained and contextual.
Think about a master craftsman working with wood. He doesn't just smash his will into the wood. He looks at the grain.
Yeah.
He works with the material.
Right.
His action is constrained by the reality of the wood. That's contextual action.
Versus the empowered approach, which would be what? Trying to force the wood to be metal.
Or just hacking at it because you have a vision regardless of what the material wants to do. The source calls the holistic approach alignment, not weakness, but accuracy, not passivity, but alignment.
I want to bring this down to the ground level because we're talking about these high-level concepts, but this actually explains why everyone I know is exhausted.
It is the architecture of burnout.
It is. If I wake up every day believing that if I just journal enough and use enough productivity hacks and manifest my goals, I can bend the universe to my will. I'm setting myself up for daily failure.
You're carrying the weight of the world on a suspension bridge that was built for a bicycle. The text argues that this proportion isn't just about being spiritual, it's about sanity. It's about mental energy conservation.
Because if I admit I can't control the outcome, I can stop spending 90% of my battery trying to micromanage variables that are nowhere near me.
And imagine what you could do with that 90% of energy if you reinvested it into the things you can actually influence. That's why the text calls this the architecture of accuracy. It's an efficiency model.
But it's a tough sell. The source makes this humorous but very insightful point. This is why holistic spirituality cannot be marketed as empowerment.
Because it doesn't sell.
It doesn't make the ego feel larger.
Can you imagine the billboard? Come to our seminar, we will make you feel appropriately sized.
Join us and realize how little control you actually have.
It's not exactly going to fly off the shelves, but this text argues that this marketing problem is the whole point. The goal is to make the ego appropriately sized.
Appropriately sized, not crushed, not destroyed, just accurate, fitted to reality.
And the source addresses the fear here. Because when we hear make the ego smaller, we think loss.
Yeah.
We think we're losing our edge.
But the text is adamant that reduction is not a loss.
It says it's the beginning of clarity.
The beginning of clarity.
Think about the energy you spend maintaining that inflated self. The energy it takes to pretend you have control over things you don't. The anxiety of constantly needing to make things happen.
It's exhausting. It's a full-time job.
When you let that go, when you accept your appropriate size, all that energy is freed up.
Yeah.
Stop hallucinating agency where it doesn't exist, and you can finally see what is actually in front of you. That is clarity.
It's interesting because usually we think clarity leads to power. Like if I see things clearly, then I can dominate them. But here, the source is suggesting that giving up the desire to dominate is the prerequisite for seeing clearly.
Yes, exactly. You cannot see the world clearly if you are only looking at it as something to be conquered. You only see your own projection.
You have to step back.
You have to participate, not command.
It really forces you to look at your own frustration differently. That moment you're banging your head against the wall, maybe the wall isn't the problem. Maybe it's your insistence that you should be able to walk through it.
It's the difference between breaking the wall and finding the door.
So we've gone from empowerment is egoic compensation, a band-aid for feeling small, to proportion, which is accepting our place in the larger scheme of things.
And seeing that place not as a prison, but as the only place where real effective action can actually happen.
It flips the script. We think the empowered person is the strong one, the one barking orders. But the text implies that person is actually the fragile one.
Because they're operating on a fantasy. And fantasies eventually collide with reality. The person who practices accuracy and proportion, they are much harder to break because they are already aligned with how things are.
They're like the willow tree versus the oak tree in a storm. The oak tries to stand tall, it resists, and it breaks. The willow moves with the wind, it's constrained and contextual, and it survives.
That's a perfect image for it.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, we're left with a pretty radical idea. We spend our lives trying to get bigger titles, bigger influence, assuming that size equals safety.
And the source says safety is actually found in precision, in being exactly the size you are, no bigger.
I want to leave you with this thought. We usually assume that anxiety comes from helplessness, from feeling like we can't do enough. But based on what we read today, ask yourself this. Is your anxiety actually coming from the opposite? Is it coming from the exhausting, impossible belief that you are supposed to be in control of it all?
And if you put that burden down, who would you be?
Thanks for diving in with us. We'll see you next time.